Chapter 68. It had been fairly recently that he'd discovered it. The next level. He'd hit a limit again, had found no further way to improve, the full power of Super Saiyan 2. He'd taken to meditating for increased lengths of time, trying to discover if this was really all the power that was within him, what had brought him to the mountains Piccolo eventually found him on. One day, he'd gone deeper within his subconscious than ever before. It was so dark, down there, in the depths of his own soul. He drifted, lost in self-reflection, for an uncountable time. He was lost within himself, and it seemed like he'd never awaken. Then, a light. He realized he was still falling, still descending deeper into his spirit. In the blackness, he'd had no reference point, but now there was a light. A tiny point of golden light, far below him. Expanding as he neared it. The heat was incredible. He was near, now, and this close it was a vast wall of blinding yellow, stretching out on either side, away into infinity. Slowly, he reached a hand down. The tip of his finger brushed the light. He woke with a start, eyes snapping open, yelling with surprise as fire flooded his veins, as light flared around his body. That was the first time it happened. He'd very occasionally tried it again, to try and accustom himself to the change. Now, facing Janemba, he was about to put it to the test for the first time. What you're seeing now, Raditz said, his hair blowing in the unnatural wind of his aura, is the second level of my race's transformation, we call it Super Saiyan 2. Janemba's eyes narrowed. It still seemed to be incapable of speech, but in this form it was at least intelligent enough to tell that something significant was about to happen. Goku leapt back to avoid another of Broly's attacks. Something suddenly flashed in the back of his mind. What? This energy, it's coming from the breach. His eyes widened. Raditz. Wow, feels like he's gone Super Saiyan 2. That's awesome, but... He realized as he continued to dodge Broly's swipes, he's still powering up, don't tell me he's found some way to surpass this form. Is that even possible? No way. Gohan muttered as Tolz struggled to pick himself up, the half-Saiyan had felt the same energy. He can't be about to. Now this, said Raditz, lowering his stance. It can't be. Nail gasped. Is the next level, this, is to go beyond. Freya, the blue electric sparks surrounding his body flared up, dancing around him and laying waste to the rock he was standing on. Aowa. Veins stood out on his forehead and neck. Sweat beads formed on his forehead, running down his face. His golden aura became a solid sphere of light, radiating out from his body. Hi-ya. Goku finally landed a solid hit to Broly's neck, dropping the monstrous Saiyan for good. Then, it hit him. This ki feels solid. Even from this distance, the weight of it is unbelievable. He staggered back from the onslaught, clutching his head. Agag. Raditz's scream continued. The effort was almost unbearable. This power couldn't just be turned on at the flick of a mental switch. He had to drag it to the surface, kicking and screaming, every step towards it a monumental challenge. No! King Kai shouted, antennae twitching. Don't do this now, Raditz. Reality is unstable as it is, you're still not used to this. If you can't control it. He trembled at the thought. The ground began to crumble, falling away beneath Raditz's feet and leaving him floating in the air. Yawa. Even the stoic Janemba raised an eyebrow in surprise as Raditz's power continued to rise. Aoweawaf. His voice began to crack. The air was drawn into a swirling vortex of wind centered around him, practically forming a hurricane around his body. The ground was shaking, not just around them, but all throughout hell. Nail collapsed to the ground, feeling like his mind had just been hit with a sledgehammer. What power? And it's still going up. What is he doing? Piccolo had tried breaking down the barrier, but it seemed King Yema's palace was stuck fast inside its strange prison, and it was beyond his abilities to free it. Of course, that wasn't what he'd been doing for the last couple of minutes. He'd mostly been gawking. What, but, just how strong does he have to be before he's satisfied, huh? Air rushed past him, pulled into the growing whirlwind, miles away. Deep in the mountains, Tien, Kaioshin and Launch were staring into empty space, sensing, but hardly believing, the massive power output they were sensing. It's too much. Tien groaned, covering his head with his hands. Kaioshin was lying on the floor, eyes screwed shut. Launch stood alone, beaming. I knew you'd save us. You can't help it, you're just drawn to this kind of trouble. Break ambled into the room, 7 years old, now. Currently wearing pajamas, and gazing up into the air with the unrestrained wonder of a child. That's my dad. Launch wondered at this. How would she know? She barely knew him. That's my dad, the girl repeated in a whisper. He'd taken a quick breath, but it was impossible to stop the scream escaping. It felt like his whole body was on fire. Hi-ya! His determination never wavered. Don't stop now. Earthquakes racked the landscape. The sky itself seemed to shake. The strange jellybean-looking things created by Janemba's chaotic energy cracked and split. The light around Raditz grew even brighter, the sparks even more frantic. He felt the physical changes begin. First, the wrenching pull at the back of his head as his hair began to extend, growing out down his back. Ray! Bursts of light began to randomly shoot off the Super Scion's body. Janemba's grin became a frown as it found itself forced backwards by the relentless outpouring of force. I'm telling you, Raditz. King Kai shouted with all his telepathic force. Don't do it. The sparks around Raditz's body grew into great leaping arcs of electricity, shooting out several meters away, coiling around him like angry serpents. Another breath. Onwards. Lakes of blood were dotted around hell, these began to boil and evaporate. High above, on the sacred world of the Kaioshin blinked. He turned to Kibito. What is that? Yeah. Raditz lifted his head up, yelling at the sky. The light around him was almost white now. Janemba was not happy at its continued failure to eliminate this annoyance. Grah! It charged Raditz, swiping with one clawed hand, but he somersaulted over its head, landing behind it and punching it in the small of the back. As it stumbled, he charged up energy in one hand, splitting it into dozens of fragments as he threw it. Blitz cannon. Janemba hissed, sent tumbling to the ground by the attack. Raditz leapt into the air, then swooped back down, one fist extended, to drive it down further into the rock. Janemba, however, wasn't there by the time he arrived. Its image faded, scattering into 1,000 tiny blocks of color, which then scattered and disappeared. Ah, now that's shifting as I know it, Gohan thought. But all these other techniques are interesting, who's doing all this? They must be a master. And they're near where Raditz was putting out that massive power, friend or foe, I wonder. Janemba soon shifted back into reality behind Raditz, a pulsing green energy ball in one hand. However, it swung at thin air, as Raditz vanished with a tiny whistling noise. He, in turn, appeared directly behind Janemba, smiling. Instant transmission. You like it? You're not the only one who can get around, you know. Janemba growled, shifting away several hundred meters, but Raditz appeared directly in front of it via instant transmission the very next second, maintaining his cocky smile. This process repeated for a while, a peculiar game of cat and mouse, with Janemba unable to find somewhere Raditz couldn't follow, and so couldn't get a more advantageous position to launch an attack from. Finally, it stopped trying to run. As predicted, he appeared inches away, expecting it to flee again. However, instead it leaned forwards, opening its mouth and firing a green mouth blast with a mighty bellow. Rayraf. Raditz skidded back across Hell's dusty ground, wincing with pain as he felt the stinging burn of the unexpectedly sudden energy attack. When it had ended, he sighed, opening his eyes and seeing Janemba shift into view, closing the distance. So. You finally landed a good hit on me, eh? Ha. Janemba bent down and picked a small object up from the ground. Raditz recognized it as one of the small clubs the ogres who guarded Hell sometimes carried. In Janemba's hand, it instantly sprouted into an ornate red-bladed longsword. Oh, a swordsman. Aren't you just full of surprises? Raditz unslung the Z-sword from his back, effortlessly raising the tremendous weight one-handed and pointing the tip at Janemba. So far I've matched you trick for trick. Stronger transformation, teleporting around, let's see what happens when we cross swords. Janemba made a sideways swing, which Raditz parried with some effort. The impact of Janemba's sword sent out a shockwave that shook his arm, but he held firm. Jumping back, he broke off, dodging out of the way of Janemba's second swing. However, a razor-sharp slice of energized air rushed past him, grazing his shoulder, created by Janemba's attack. Right, it can make shockwaves just by swinging its sword around. I'll have to learn how to do that someday. It chased after him, trying to stay on the offensive. He counterattacked, and they sped around the wide plains, swords clashing in a high-speed blur. Finally, he knocked it off balance, sending it staggering away sword arm first. He followed up with a concentrated, explosive energy blast, but Janemba simply strode unharmed out of the flames. I'm starting to realize, he thought to himself, just how tough this thing is. On one hand, I'm consistently besting it in terms of speed and hand-to-hand skill, but I don't think I'm doing any permanent damage, whereas it's chipping away at my stamina. I can't maintain Super Saiyan 3 for more than a couple of minutes. It's extremely resilient, maybe I can cut it open if I can get one good hit in with the Z-sword, though. He dug his feet into the ground, watching Janemba's approach, then launched himself full force. Both swung their swords. There was a metallic clang. Both skidded to a halt, facing away from each other, waiting. All of a sudden, the Z-sword fell in half, cut cleanly in two. Raditz stared at the remaining half in his hand. Wah. I thought this thing was pretty much unbreakable. Nothing I've cut with it has ever put so much as a scratch on it. He turned, hearing Janemba run at him, and hurled the hilt and half-blade at it. However, its abdomen shifted out of existence for a brief moment, allowing the sword to pass harmlessly through it, before reforming. Well, here goes. Raditz darted to the side as another sword wave sliced by him, then leapt in, aiming a punch at Janemba's face. However, down came the red sword again, before he could connect. He threw both hands up in a desperate defense, clapping them on each side of the blade and halting it, inches from his face. The two struggled for a minute, pushing back and forth, the sword trembling in their grip. Eventually, it simply crumbled, colors fading to gray, collapsing into dust. Ha! Raditz grinned. I guess your power doesn't last forever, and neither will you. Every force has a reaction. He clenched his fists, power surging around him. Your own negative energy will be your undoing. Hi-ah. He ducked under a swing from Janemba, bringing up his fist towards its chin. However, something suddenly lurched in his stomach. His head began to pound. No, not now. He moaned as he collapsed, returning to his normal form. That's the weakness of Super Saiyan 3, it uses up so much energy it's impossible to sustain it for long. He backed away slowly, noting that Janemba was still eyeing him with curiosity, wondering what this change meant. But how am I supposed to beat this monster without it? Piccolo shielded his face with his arms. Damn it, Raditz, are you trying to kill us all? If you keep this up, you're going to destroy everything. And we're getting reports of earthquakes around the breach, the news anchor said, that being the source of the mysterious attackers. It's possibly a side effect of whatever strange event has caused this invasion. Raditz's head bent back down under what felt like an enormous weight of ki. His hair grew again, stretching further down his back. I'm not going to make it. Damn it, I knew this was risky. He forced himself to focus, withdrawing into his mind's eye. He recalled the darkness. The point of light. He made himself the point. I've got it. Don't, stop. He managed to raise his head again. At last, he entered the final stages, feeling his limits shatter. He began to truly ascend. The space within his mind was vast, infinite, but he didn't lose his way back to the surface. The light, the power compelled him, pushed him back into the real world. And there it was, as always when he did this. A momentary mental image. The roaring Owozaru, the primitive Saiyan monster, far behind him now. But echoes of it survived here, in this. KKK, Aga. The light was thrown outwards, blocking out the sun, as he flung out his arms and legs, screaming in triumph. It was done. The light faded. Janemba lowered its hand, which had been shielding its eyes from the brightness, glaring at its transformed enemy. There was still gold, as ever. But it wasn't just an ethereal aura now. Every inch of Raditz seemed to emanate it, his body itself was glowing. His hair extended down his back, just as long as it had been before he'd cut it. His widow's peak had become a single dangling lock of yellow over his face. His eyebrows were gone, replaced with a jutting, animalistic forehead. His skin had taken on an unnatural, almost oily sheen, like he was made of something other than flesh and blood. The blue electricity didn't recede, remaining as massive arcs coiling and twisting around him. And his face, something savage lurked behind his eyes. What the? Piccolo breathed. I don't believe it. Goku said, smiling. Launch and Break grinned. King Kai breathed out. We're alive, for now. Kaioshin stared down at the mortal realms, almost unbelieving. In all my millennia, I've only ever felt this kind of power once before. Kibito floated up next to him. You mean Majin Buu? Kaioshin nodded. Yes, this man, he may be the equal of that monster. Our prayers have been answered, Kibito. The servant scratched his head. Who would you pray to? Oh. Kaioshin shrugged. Poor choice of words, I suppose. Well, there is the sleeping one, but surely that's just a legend. I've watched this universe, practically run it, for thousands of years. There's nothing higher than the Kaioshin. If there was, I'd know about it. Surely. Sorry that took so long, Raditz said, finally breathing normally. But I haven't been able to practice this one much. He flexed his arm, fixing his gaze on Janemba. I call this one Super Saiyan 3. Janemba hissed, lashing its tail. This new development was distressing. Its enemy had changed somehow, and it didn't like that. The Golden Man seemed more threatening now, but Janemba couldn't quite figure out what exactly it was about him. Never mind. It was having too much fun to worry about something like that, and there was so much left to destroy. Well, that's over, Piccolo said, relaxing. At least I know the fight's in good hands. Though I can scarcely believe it. In this smaller, stronger form, Janemba would have made a mockery of us, the afterlife's greatest warriors, as we were. But now, Raditz is handling it on his own. What power! Now, about this barrier. He tried another full power blast, but it held. Damn it, not even a scratch. Gah, I hate this wall. He moaned. Crack. Piccolo looked around at the noise, wondering. There it was. A single, solitary crack in the barrier. What did oh, you've got to be kidding me. That's its weakness. He shook his head. I guess I've got to do what I've got to do. I hate this wall. He repeated, mumbling. A tiny chip opened up, nothing compared to the first crack he'd made in the wall. Looks like I have to say it with conviction. If this is somebody's idea of a joke, humph. All right. He glared at the barrier. You piece of crap. Crack. What the hell kind of weakness is that, huh? Insults. Crack. Insults, eh. I'm insulted that I have to deal with this. Crack. I can't hold this form for long, Raditz said, so let's get on with it. HRR. The air seemed to warp as Janemba rushed forwards, intent on destroying this person who seemed so intent on ruining its fun. It opened with a high spinning kick, and Raditz ducked back, hair flying out behind him as he dodged Janemba's attack. He pushed off the ground with one hand, a deceptively gentle-looking motion that propelled him up with incredible force. His feet swung at the creature's head, but it caught him by both ankles, stopping the blow. He continued the movement, swinging himself up and releasing a close-range two-handed blast at its head, forcing it to let go and jump out of the way. He followed up, pressing the advantage and ramming home an elbow strike to its neck. It growled in irritation, swinging its tail at him. He nimbly jumped onto the swiping limb, bouncing off of it and kicking Janemba in the stomach, driving it back again. Janemba snarled, trying a jump kick. Raditz dodged around it, firing another quick energy blast from one hand. Janemba hurriedly raised its hands to intercept the attack, forming a small portal in front of its face, which swallowed up the blast. Tull spat blood, feeling his newly gained Super Saiyan powers leaving him. He defeated me, that quickly. This isn't the end, do you hear? A kick to the head silenced him. Gohan frowned. You didn't deserve that kind of power. I hope, he cocked his head sideways, sensing something strange. What's shifting again? But, again, it's strange. They opened a pathway, but didn't go through it all. They let something else through. I didn't think that was possible. Raditz relaxed, calming his mind. It's going to emerge somewhere near me, probably, behind. At the realization, he leapt into the air, feeling his own blast pass right under him, the heat singing his shoes. He landed several feet away to avoid the explosion, turning his attention back to Janemba. You've got some weird abilities, my friend. It's no wonder you're doing all this to reality. I have to wonder if you're even conscious of it, though. Janemba had just about got the situation figured out. It laughed out loud at its good fortune, grabbing hold of Raditz's hair. He tried to throw another punch, but with a jolt of movement its arm began to elongate, stretching out to the horizon and carrying him with it. Janemba flicked its shoulder, sending a ripple down its elongated arm, the movement reaching its whip-like conclusion at the exact moment it let go of him, letting him fly back, barely conscious, into a cooling blood pond. This isn't good. Piccolo hovered, uncertain. He's lost almost all of his power. I should go help him, but... He glanced back at King Yema's palace, still encased in its strange prison. The barrier was significantly cracked, but it would probably take 10 minutes or so of sustained shouting and cursing to break through it. Can't leave it here, I have to free Yema, so he can start to restore order, but Janemba has to be stopped, and Raditz can't do it alone anymore. He gritted his teeth. What do I believe I can be of assistance, said an imperious voice. A strange-looking creature floated down towards Piccolo, hovering next to him. What manner of being are you? Piccolo asked. Whoever he is, he's hiding a lot of power. How much, I wonder. I've never seen him before, but he seems familiar, somehow. That matters little. The object is the salvation of the universe, correct? The prevention of the destruction of all reality. That's what it looks like. The creature that's causing it, Janemba, has to be taken out before we can restore order, but every second that goes by before we free King Yema plunges the universe further into chaos. Very well. I've observed your efforts. This barrier's weakness is insults, it seems. How curious. The newcomer flew over to the wall. Stand clear. Picken chuckled. I wouldn't bother. It took me several minutes just to get it this damaged, it's hardly. The creature leaned over towards the wall, cupping both hands around his mouth, and began to whisper. It lasted 20 seconds, and Picken heard nothing, strain his ears though he might. Finally, the creature straightened up, stepped back, and nodded. There. Now we can get on with our real business. The barrier shattered into a million pieces. What did you say? Picken gasped. There's an insult that devastating. But of course, he replied. It wasn't hard for a mind like mine to find the perfect solution.